All right. It is November 10th at 5:32 p.m. I'm going to call this work session for the Fairbanks North Starborough School Board into order. The board would like to take this moment to respectfully acknowledge that we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission statement: as a community, we create supportive learning environments where all students thrive. Ms. Richardson, will you please call the roll?
Miss Carol Hubbard,
Here.
Mr. Dorn,
Here.
Miss Dulian,
Here.
Miss Hewitt is on Zoom. We'll see if her volume works. Miss Hewitt,
Here.
thank you. Mrs. Hull,
Here.
Miss Maple,
Here.
Mr. Burgess.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, on our agenda tonight is the presentation by administration for the Two Rivers Homestead Charter application. Dr. Meinert.
All right, thank you, President Burgess. I'll be handing it over to Assistant Superintendent Gillum to start off administration's presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Meinert. Thank you, President Burgess. Tonight, Mr. DeGraw and Ms. LaPlante and I will go through our presentation of the Two Rivers Homestead Charter. Our goals of the presentation, again, are to review the Homestead Charter application from an administrative perspective, share key observations and consideration for the school board's discussion, identify potential legal or procedural concerns within the application, and then highlight some potential district-wide impacts that could come from approving the application. We'll have time at the end for questions, and we'll work our way through the application section by section, addressing the associated appendices in whatever section they're related to. For a little context, starting off this presentation, we did want to note the Alaska State statute relating to application for a charter school. It sets before the board the responsibility to prescribe an application procedure for the establishment of a charter school in the school district. Also, we want to note that there were some specific changes to our policy this fall due to House Bill 57 adding 2 sentences to this state statute, stating that the application procedure must allow an application to be submitted at any time during a school year for the following school year, and also that a local school board shall announce the deadline to submit an application for establishment of a charter school. The statute language also includes the provision that a decision of the local school board approving or denying an application for a charter school must be in writing and must be issued within 60 days after the application. Our specific school board policies relating to the application submission for the establishment of a charter school. This is the policy 935.1 that addresses both the requirement to allow submission of an application at any point in time during the school year, but also acknowledges the reconciliation of the impact of allowing an application to happen at any point in time during the year and the impact on the school district as far as operating that charter school and an impact on the budget. So this was your policy that was updated this fall, stating that applications submitted after October 1, if approved, could not begin operation until after January 1 of the following school year. This year, we established that October 1 was the submission deadline that is now also required per state statute and in this policy as well. Additionally, policy 935.2 addresses the application procedure for establishing a charter school. The bullets in this section are paraphrased, but they walk through the steps regarding a notice of intent to establish a charter school should be submitted to the school district. Then the school district meets with charter school representatives, reviewing the application procedures and requirements. Then the charter school prepares the application. After that, the board will hold a public work session with the charter school representatives. Then following that work session, there is a public hearing on the proposed charter school, and then it is placed on the agenda to take board action. For administration, our time for collaboration with the charter school is really between the time of that letter with their notice of intent to establish a charter school and the point in time that they submit their application. After the application is submitted, our work shifts to reviewing the application in order to prepare a presentation for you regarding our review of the application. Specifically for this process, we did outline how we followed those provisions in the policy. In February, there was an initial letter of intent for the charter that was submitted. On the 17th of February, we met with the APC and charter representatives on the 24th regarding that letter of intent. At that point, we acknowledged the school board policy that was in place at that time, requiring applications to be submitted by October 1. For this particular application that you have in front of you, a second letter of intent was submitted on September 3rd. And then we also met with charter representatives on that day as well. They submitted their final application on October 1st. You had their presentation last week. This is our presentation, and then currently it's tentatively slated for potential board action on the 18th to all fit within that 60-day timeline from when the application was submitted to final decisions. Now we'll begin with the review of the charter school application. First, we want to acknowledge that in the application for the Two Rivers Homestead Charter School, there are several enrollment targets that are referenced throughout the application. They state a minimum enrollment of 75, and we'll talk quite a bit, Mr. DeGraw and I will both talk about the impact of that number specifically regarding that minimum enrollment. They also, in their presentation, talked about a maximum in-person enrollment of 125 students. In the presentation, they talked about the maximum enrollment of 150 students if hybrid. However, in the application, they do not make that distinction. Throughout their application, they also speak to enrollment targets of both 80 students and 90 students. For this presentation and for this analysis, we will be focusing on that 100 student enrollment target, since that seemed to be the most frequently referenced plan. In that enrollment target, there are no specific grade level targets. They refer to mixed age classes or mixed grade level classes from pre-K through 8th grade. We do want to note also that pre-K students are counted in their average daily membership at a 0.5 amount. They're not counted as a full FTE in that amount. The PTR for all grade levels stated in the application is 24. So we do want to note that for those lower grade levels, that does exceed that state target class size of 23. Historically, we have a slide here for you that shows the Two Rivers Elementary School enrollment. It was referenced that their enrollment has certainly changed over time. Again, for their charter application, the minimum enrollment of 75 is what's stated in their application, because there is significant fiscal impact if it is less than that. Currently, they stated they have 72 students on the intent to enroll form. In 2024-2025, during the 20-day count, their enrollment was 64 students, and for the preceding 3 years before that, their enrollment stayed fairly constant in that 60 to low 60s to mid 60s point. Their target enrollment for their budget is 100 students. We did also want to note, and we'll talk about that later, that there currently are 21 BEST students in the Two Rivers area. So that's how many students BEST has enrolled in the Two Rivers area. A big kind of unique part of their application is their proposed homeschool field school option. The program concept is that it's designed for non-Fairbanks North Starborough School District correspondence students to enroll part-time in charter activities. They did also note that BEST students would be allowed to enroll part-time in those activities as well. However, we're going to focus specifically on the non-district students, because there would be some different implications and processes around theirs that we did have questions around. First, there are two specific policy considerations to take when considering how this proposed field school could work. The first one is School Board Policy 1026 that relates to part-time enrollment. During the APC's presentation, they referenced this particular way of enrolling where a student, a non-district homeschool student, can enroll part-time in our district schools. However, they acknowledge that and assign some of their allotment or FTE allocation to our district so that we are able to count them as a part-time student in our enrollment. So that would be one way of looking at doing that. The other one that they could consider, that we could consider using, would be School Board Policy 1024.1, which relates to tuition costs. And it specifically speaks to being able to have tuition for programs or special programs that we could charge tuition for that. They also, again, did note that best correspondence students would not pay tuition and would not be classified as part-time students. Concerns around this are really the unknown. The process was not clear in terms of how they would manage enrollment, attendance, funding. Would there be an enrollment maximum that they would allow? The timeline for enrollment and implementation was unspecified. There also was no schedule or program details that were provided. And both policies require us to base the part-time enrollment or the tuition on the number of hours or the number of classes that students are enrolled in. So those details do give us pause in terms of that we don't know exactly how that would look and how that process would work on both sides. Appendix B that is a part of this section is actually not included, so there is no draft contract included in the charter school application. Administration did provide a sample contract and examples of other charter schools contracts after our September 3rd meeting on September 4th. There are two different requirements that state that there does need to be a contract as a part of a charter school application. So School Board Policy 935.23 requires a contract as part of any charter school application, and Alaska State Statute also mandates a formal contract between the charter school and the school board and has specific provisions that do need to be included in that contract. Appendix C is the bylaws of the APC. There were a few points in the bylaws that we did have questions on. The first one being regarding election and nomination process. There's a specific APC seat for a non-parent community member seat that has a very closed process regarding the election and nomination process. It speaks to it on page 60, that it would be nominated and voted on by the APC in a closed session. And I believe it also says it would have to be a unanimous approval. Reimbursement of expenses is mentioned in their bylaws for APC members. That's not a practice that we have seen before with other APCs. There weren't a lot of clear specifications around what expenses would be able to be reimbursed and how that process would work. And then there also was a volunteer requirement for APC members. Specifically, we just note that because we'll talk about volunteer hours later and want to acknowledge the current litigation in the MATSU regarding volunteer requirements for charter schools. So our summary from section 1, just want to note the enrollment and the fiscal impact. That minimum 75 students is very important. The unknown details regarding the homeschool field school. There is no draft contract included, and there are some pieces of the bylaws that we would look for clarification on. Section 2 relates to organization and administration. Our first point in that section is just in the requested waivers. It references Appendix B, but there is no Appendix B. There's no draft contract in Appendix B. There's only the proposed lease agreement. So we do not know what waivers would be requested in that contract. There are several items in the administrative policy manual or the parent-student compact that would require waivers, and there are other pieces throughout their application that would also require waivers. Once identified, those waivers would need further administrative and legal review before we would consider whether or not those waivers should be granted to the charter school. And it was also acknowledged during the presentation that there were 3 sections of the FEA collective bargaining agreement that they had reached out regarding waivers from. Articles 401 relating to transfer and reassignment, 601 relating to school leadership positions, and then 505 related to partial student days that they were looking for waivers are. There are also a couple points in our presentation where there would be other additional FEA waivers based upon our analysis that they would need to request if they wanted to move forward with their plan. In section 2, they also reference after-school care, and I do want to note that during their presentation, they did want to refer to it as clubs, not care, for legal considerations, so we certainly can think of them as after-school clubs. There's proposed after-school programming until 5 p.m., Monday through Friday. However, there are limited details in the application on the program structure, the activities, and the method for supervision. They do speak to both anticipated costs to families, but there is no specifics around what those costs would be. And also the cost to the district for staffing and supplies is not clearly, or to the charter school is not defined as well. The staffing requirements, I do believe they did mention in their presentation that they acknowledged they would need a certified staff member there. If they were relying on volunteers, there would need to be a certified staff member there at all points in time for supervision of those volunteers during those after-school clubs. Next item is the calendar. So they do have a different year-round calendar that does differ significantly from the school district, which is certainly a provision of charter schools that is allowed. We need, in Alaska, state statute requires 180 student contact days plus 4 teacher work days. In the negotiated agreement are the provisions that we work from. The calendar that's proposed has 176 student contact days plus 5 teacher work days in the application, so they are short some days. We do want to note teacher work days and vacation holidays do not count as student contact days. Additionally, when considering when we're considering the calendar, we look at how many professional development and parent-teacher conference days they are. 10 professional development days are allowed by state statute to count as student contact days. They currently have 7 professional development days. The district has 6, and they have 4 parent-teacher conference days. The district has 4. Parent-teacher conference days are allowed to count as contact days when they're included as a part of those 10 professional development days. So when we review the calendar, we will note that there's 1 professional development day that we don't count in their student days. That one's in quarter 1. Generally speaking, we look to have quarters be approximately 45 days each. So quarter 1 for the proposed charter goes from July 22nd to September 17th, so about 44 days until fall break. Again, we did not count July 16th since that was an additional PD day outside of those 10 days. October 2nd, 47 days from fall break until winter break. Quarter 3, 47 days, and then quarter 4 is 38 days. Semesters, typically we aim to balance at approximately 90 days each. In the calendar, proposed calendar, semester 1 is 91 days and semester 2 is 85 days. Regarding the school day, we do want to note that there is no sample daily schedule that we can review regarding time allotted for core academics and then time allotted for the exploratory homestead activities. The reason we look for a sample daily schedule is to make sure that we can ensure that preparation time allowances for FEA are provided in that so that they have their duty-free time, duty-free lunchtime, and also student-free time for their preparation time. I do also want to note that in the presentation, it stated that the school day started at 8:30. However, they acknowledged that that was the first point in time students could be dropped off. So in their application, it specifically states that the school day would start at 9 a.m. So that is what our analysis is based off of. For Friday early outs, those are proposed for professional development or teacher prep time. It's mentioned in a couple different places slightly differently, whether those would be staff meetings and PD time, but it also references in there that there may be teacher prep time if needed on that, which would also require a FEA waiver. The other thing that we want to note about the early outs that are proposed every Friday is currently they are too short to meet the requirements for a full day per Alaska statute. So Alaska statute requires a day should be at least 4 hours long, exclusive of intermissions for grades 1 through 3, and all other grades should be 5 hours. Currently, 9 a.m. to 1:15 p.m. is 4.25 hours minus the intermission for lunch makes it 3.75 hours, so it is short in that piece. Additional considerations regarding their calendar, grading. So grading timelines with the adjusted calendar, we would need to make sure that we were able to store and communicate grades at different time periods because both quarter 1 and quarter 3 ending dates are different from our district quarter 1 and quarter 3 ending dates. Additionally, this isn't in the presentation, but I just want to note that for times outside of our calendar, the related services that our special education department provides for charter schools could potentially be impacted based upon when those breaks in, when the different start and end times were for their quarters. They also reference portfolios for grading in section 3, pages 30 to 31. They do also, though, mention in the application that they would be using our district grading report cards. So it's just a little unclear. There are other charter schools that use portfolios for grading. We just want to note again that that would require a waiver from school district policy for both elementary school grading. The adjusted calendar may conflict with district assessment schedules. That is published at the beginning of the school year. So that would need to be addressed just in terms of their ability to have a big enough window to offer those districts and state assessments. And then again, I just want to note there's 37 early dismissal days if we assume every Friday is an early dismissal day and then the other early dismissal dates in their calendar. And with those currently scheduled times, those dates would not count as student contact days either because they don't meet the minimum requirements for a student contact day. Next item is the administrative policy manual. This is an appendix. I didn't actually put the appendix in there, but it is an appendix, Appendix E in the application. So just want to note in the administrative policy manual, it is an admissions requirement to review and sign the parent and student handbook. It is also an admission requirement to review and sign the family and parent commitments, which are also included in an appendix. I note that just because there are some items on there that could be for consideration regarding the requirement to pay a student fee in lieu of providing school supplies, and then a requirement to provide a healthy snack and lunch each day. The contribution of volunteer hours is also referenced in several different places throughout the application, but some of the language is not necessarily consistent throughout. I'll address that at a different point in the presentation. In the student parent handbook, there are also references to several policies that would require waivers if you were willing to consider waivers to those. For example, student discipline, they speak about knives, bullying, a dispute appeal, and parent-supported in-school suspension are all examples of areas where we would require waivers from your current board policy. There also is reference to the charter school being able to make its own decision regarding school closure for emergency needs, and that would also require a waiver. And then there is also a provision for a withdrawal for repeated disciplinary infractions, and so that would also need to be addressed. Again, considerations, the requested waivers, there's no draft contract to identify those waivers, and the FEA waivers have been submitted, but there's no evidence of approval. Details regarding after-school clubs are just limited. The calendar does not have enough days currently. Additionally, the school day, the early out day time does not have enough time to count as a school day. Without a sample schedule, we can't assess the preparation time and ability to cover that. And then also, just in terms of the administrative policy manual, there are some pieces in there that would require waivers in order for them to be a part of that manual. Section 3, educational program and student achievement. The first section I would like to address there is just regarding staffing considerations. There are several points in their application where they speak to flexible staffing and quarterly enrollment assessments. Oh, actually, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I take that back. In their staffing and hiring process, they speak about a requirement to sign an agreement of understanding regarding the school philosophy and job requirements, and that would not be allowable per our current collective bargaining agreement. Actual hiring would have to follow district procedures and collective bargaining agreements, both FEA and ESSA. So all positions would be filled through the standard hiring process, considering seniority, qualifications, and contractual requirements. Another point that was mentioned in the application was the APC's involvement in hiring, and we just want to note that charter governance, aside from the principal position, charter governance does not participate or determine teacher placement. This is where I'm going now. flexible staffing. So there's a couple points in the application in this section that refers to flexible staffing. So it is important to note there is no specific grade level enrollment target. So there isn't an enrollment target for each grade level because of the mixed age classrooms. Their class size target right now of 24, though, is above the state statute of 23, the state statute language of 23. They also speak to quarterly enrollment reviews proposed to adjust staffing, and we just want to note, it says in there, in cases of, page 24, in cases of declining enrollment, the school may consider combining classes or temporarily reducing staff levels to remain cost effective. We just want to make note that mid-year changes are not permitted in terms of reducing staffing. Teachers sign one-year contracts, so there's limited in-year flexibility, but certainly from year to year, staffing could be adjusted. They're also, in the application, I believe principal is referenced, head teacher is referenced, but then also in the budget, they refer to lead teachers and sharing those duties between 2.5 positions, I believe, in the 100-student budget. So we would just look for clarification and compensation regarding how they would propose to have multiple lead teachers supporting the leadership of the building. Regarding curriculum in this section, it is an application requirement per state statute that the charter school application includes a written instructional program that addresses state content standards and that aligns with the content on the statewide student assessment system. So we just want to note that there is, for core academic areas, there are no curriculum provided. It states, and I believe there was a clarification during the presentation, the terms curriculum versus curricular materials. So there may be some confusion in that, but just want to note that there is not, the board does not have the ability to assess what is proposed right now in order to ensure that it aligns with state standards without having that included in the application. The application states that it will be selected by the principal or lead teachers and approved by the APC. At the work session last week, there was a list of preferred curricular materials and estimated costs that was referenced. That wasn't a part of the initial application. However, our concern just remains regarding alignment, that without those specific examples already selected, you as a board aren't able to ensure that the Alaska state standards are being covered in that curriculum. Next, regarding special education, there is a half-time special education teacher budgeted for a school of 100 students, which would be a appropriate, potentially an appropriate amount of staffing for that number of students. The budget also includes, I believe, 2.5 ESSA teachers assistants that could be special education paraprofessionals or classroom tutors in order to support the special education teacher. Again, our concern in the application, there is a line in the parent compact that does the parent-student commitments. There is a line that states, I understand that while Two Rivers Homestead Charter School is committed to supporting every learner, some specialized services available in larger schools may not be offered here. Again, while that line acknowledges that they may not offer all services, we would also be looking for how they will consistently handle applications where a student's least restrictive environment would not be at Two Rivers. So again, we're looking for what would be the consistent way that the charter school will handle those situations, because again, it would not serve as a district-wide program placement for students. There is also language in the application regarding special education and external supports and community-based services. Those are the related services that we do provide. However, our concern would be that how would those services be paid for if they were being provided by other community providers? Again, we would look back to what are the services, related services that we can provide. There's also language in the application regarding legal compliance and a dedicated IEP coordinator. I would assume that would be the special education teacher, but I'm not sure, as there isn't another position in the budget regarding a special education secretary or support staff in that sense. In terms of gifted education, there is limited information provided on how gifted services would be addressed, particularly in lower grade levels. Acceleration is referenced in relation to the multi-grade level classrooms or the multi-age classrooms, that there would be acceleration opportunities within that. That is another policy waiver that would be needed if they were going to look at doing acceleration through grade level changes. There's also a note for middle school students to have dual enrollment with UAF, but it's our understanding that in the middle school, students are only allowed to do a non-degree seeking path and can't earn credit through dual enrollment at UAF. So for summary of number 3, just in terms of staffing, there's a statement, we would not have FEA or SS staff be required to sign a philosophy agreement, and the hiring process follows district and union procedures, and charter governance is not involved in teacher placement. Regarding flexible staffing, it is not possible to do adjustments of staffing and reduction in terms of reductions mid-year, so we just want to make note of that. There's no core curriculum provided for the board to assess whether that aligns with state standards. Special education, again, and they would not be considered a district-wide placement site, so we just would like to have consistency in how they will handle any applications where the least restrictive environment is not Two Rivers. And then just the note on gifted education and additional details regarding how that will be handled. And next, I will turn it over to Mr. DeGraw.
All righty. Thank you, Ms. Gillum. So jumping to the facility portion of the application, the proposed facility site is the former Two Rivers Elementary School. It's important to note that that building is currently occupied by the BEST program and is not currently available for rent. The proposed lease agreement would be between the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District and the Two Rivers Homestead Charter. The draft lease agreement involves a continuation of the building being shared by the charter and the BEST program. The group is proposing a lease cost estimated at $100,000 based on that shared space. For context, the other charters in the district range in between $360,000 and $450,000 in annual costs. So the proposed agreement also includes the day custodian being maintained by the BEST program, and then an additional FTE 1.0 FTE custodian would be covered by the charter. Next slide. So again, continue with the lease proposal. The group is proposing a shared space. They identified room 201 as usable space. However, unfortunately that's not usable space in the building. There's an assumption again of a continuation of a full-time presence of BEST in the building. There's currently 21 BEST students in our BEST homeschool in the Two Rivers area. Next slide. And yeah, it's to finalize that slide out. It is important to note to the concept of it's unknown how BEST will continue if that building, if the charter is established, if it occupies that building, how will the BEST numbers look going forward? That would be an important consideration for the district regarding a shared space in that building. So continuing on, the lease provision, again, $100,000 proposal by the charter group. Here's some various numbers for the board to digest for context related to the building. Average 3-year maintenance costs of the building, a little over $26,000 a year average. Currently in the 6-year CIP, there's a little over $15 million in deferred maintenance and capital construction costs projected. And then currently the 3-year average for utilities of the building, and this next bullet is our costs being covered by the district right now for the building, a little under $50,000. That's an average 3-year cost for utilities. Then we do have one FTE custodian and an FTE education specialist for the BEST program in the building. And then just important to note that the proposal by the charter group basically keeps a significant amount of operational and personnel costs on the district, which isn't necessarily typical with our charter agreements. Next slide. Regarding deed capacity, there was a little bit of conversation about this at the work session, the last work session we had, and some questions around that. Current deed capacity for the building is 98. there was talk about possibly going up to 125 for the charter. And there were some questions related to how DEED comes up with the capacity numbers for our buildings. The main factors there are in the middle section, so number of classrooms or instructional spaces that a building has, as well as common spaces and total square footage. So kind of measuring it on two fronts. How much spaces are there in classrooms or educational spaces? There also has to be enough total square footage. Also importantly, common space like hallways and common areas to facilitate a certain number of students. So 98 is the official capacity, but that's typically a guideline. It's important to note that the district has had many buildings over time that have exceeded their DEED capacities based on the enrollment in their various attendance areas. And so I think it was pointed out that even Two Rivers in the past was up in the 120 plus range, and they were able to educate students. So not necessarily a prohibiting factor, the DEED capacity of 98. And next slide. And then in summary, I'm just summarizing the past few slides. So the proposed site is the former Two Rivers Elementary School, a lease proposal of $100,000 paid by the charter, and then some average maintenance utility costs, the $15.2 million in capital construction needs coming up in the future, and then DEED calculation of capacity at 98 and the factors involved there. And we'll jump to the next section and pass it back to Ms. Gillum.
Thank you, Mr. DeGraw. Next, the next section relates to admission. So both Section 6 and Appendix G provide the admissions language for Two Rivers Homestead Charter. There are requirements for admission, including an orientation, which potentially could be a meeting, or there's also a reference to orientation tasks that would need to be completed, signing the family parent commitments, and then a requirement to review and sign the parent and student handbook. Throughout the application, there are references to volunteer hours as a requirement. Page 6 refers to our school will rely on volunteer hours. Page 7, at least 95% of families will contribute at least 10 hours per semester. Page 62, we said, refers to a volunteer requirement for being on the APC. And then on page 116, they speak to all families contribute between 20 to 45 hours per school year or more. And then also page 116 refers to an option to donate $20 to equate to 1 hour of volunteering. Again, we bring these to your attention as there is current Alaska litigation in the Mat-Su, which does raise legal concerns over requiring volunteer hours as a condition of admission or enrollment in a charter school. Next, admission preferences. So it is important to note that admission is referred to as being on a first come, first served basis in the application, throughout the application, consistently with prioritized categories rather than a random lottery. So the prioritized categories are children of founding members and staff children, students who completed the intent to enroll form, pre-K through 8 students within the boundary of the former Two Rivers School. Number 4 is K through 8 siblings of currently enrolled students. Number 5 is pre-K through 8 siblings not living within the boundary. And then number 6 is all other applicants. Overall, the process does not constitute a random lottery or a random drawing. If more students apply than space available. Again, we note that this is an application requirement, that there is a written student recruitment process, including a lottery or random drawing mechanism for enrollment. And that's per Alaska state statute, that if it is not possible to accommodate all eligible students who submit a timely application, students shall be accepted by random drawing. Appendix H, which is supposed to be this portion of the application, does again include that recruitment and retention plan, but doesn't speak to a lottery in that appendix. Again, the legal concerns come from if more students apply than could attend, admission would not be by random drawing as required by Alaska state statute. And in their application, they do speak to a waitlist process, which does speak to if more students were to apply, but it specifically refers to it as a wait list based on the timestamp of their application. And so there is an acknowledgement in the application of how they would handle more students applying than they had space for. But again, it's not a lottery. Again, there's also a concern around the preference of the Two Rivers school boundary because it is a previous school boundary. The ability to use that as a item for consideration when giving preference to students is also a concern. And then again, seated, placed on a timestamp wait list. The admissions process itself, the proposed process and timeline is overseen by the administrative assistant. It gives a lot of flexibility to the administrative assistant or designee to determine the timeline and the dates for the admissions process. States that it would open at a set date and stay open until all seats are filled. As we noted at the beginning of the presentation, I would like clarification regarding whether that's to an enrollment target of 100 students or if it would be to an enrollment target of 150 students, as that would propose a big difference there. They have to complete the orientation documents prior to signing the intent to enroll. And then again, it's the administrative assistant's discretion on how to set the enrollment dates. It states in the application that there would be time stamped with the application to the school, which is not included in the application itself. And then once all seats are filled, remaining applications would be placed on a wait list in the same order of prioritization as their application timestamp. It is a manual system. They did reference in their presentation using the district lottery system, which is an electronic system, but it was unclear exactly how that system would be utilized for the admissions process. So regarding admissions, just want to note the volunteer hours contribution and the handbook approval without the necessary waivers being in place. First come, first served categories may violate statutory limits, and so it would require significant revision to align with the Alaska statute language. The next section is section 7, which is the fiscal portion of the application. So I will turn it back over to Mr. DeGraw.
All righty. Thank you, Ms. Gillum. So going to the first slide in the fiscal section. This just for review for most board members, we have a couple of new board members. So just kind of want to lay the groundwork for how we look at the financial impact of a new charter school. We look at 2 different scenarios. Status quo is scenario A. So we have 28 total schools. We make an assumption on enrollment just to provide a baseline. So status quo is scenario A. Where do our revenues and anticipated expenditures stand with those assumptions, 28 schools and 11,248 enrollment? Scenario B would be adding a charter school. So one more school, and how does that impact our estimated or our projected revenue and expenditures? So comparing the 2 scenarios is how we establish a financial impact. Next slide. So this is a copy, I think you have this in your packet, a copy of an actual charter funding allocation sheet. It goes through a lot of different calculations, a lot of different multipliers. Basically, it's a state funding formula, a mini state funding formula for the specific charter school. And the next slide breaks it down for you in a little bit more digestible form. So we start with 100 students up in the upper right corner, the enrollment, the K-8 enrollment, estimated at 100 students. It first goes through a school size multiplier, and it goes from 100 to 145.4. Then the district cost factor, that's a geographic cost of living measurement in essence, and that's 7%. So it goes from 145 to 155.58. Then it goes through the special education multiplier, which is a 20% factor. Goes from 155 to 186. And that becomes the adjusted average daily membership, 186.69. That is multiplied by the BSA of 6,660 for a total of 1,243,379. Then we add in a portion of the discretionary local contribution of a little more than $97,000. And then subtracted for that is a 4% administrative charge that the district is allowed to charge for support to the charter per Alaska statute. and that's a little more than $45,000 deduction. So the total net estimated charter allocation based on 100 students would be just under $1.3 million. Next slide. So here again at the top of the slide, we have the $1.3 million estimated allocation. The key factors or assumption influencing this estimate are listed below. These aren't all the factors that go into the allocation, but they're the main ones. The total district enrollment, the specific charter enrollment, the base student allocation, and then the local contribution. And it's important to note that if these things really, probably the enrollment numbers are the ones that aren't necessarily going to be exactly right on our assumptions. The relatively safe to say the BSA, the local contribution could end up different than that, but that's a lesser factor. It can move by $1 million or $2 million and not necessarily be a huge driver of changes in revenue up or down. So suffice it to say that if the charter had around 100 students, that allocation they're going to receive is going to be pretty close to $1.3 million, barring a significant unexpected change. Next slide. So that's here we're dealing with the charter allocation is the main expense to the school district. So it's important to note that the district doesn't get involved in staffing costs and supply costs and curriculum costs. The district is required to provide the charter and allocation, and then their APC has the autonomy to make their educational decisions on their own. So the main expense on the expenditure side of the budget to the district is that allocation. There are some savings typically to the district expenditures, and that's what this next slide covers. The district typically, as students exit attendance area schools to go to charters, there's typically classroom teacher savings that are realized. And so this slide articulates those potential savings. So again, we're starting with 100 anticipated students in the upper part, prior slide. There we go. Yep. So this here, we're talking potential classroom teacher savings. In the upper right part of the chart, you see the anticipated enrollment for the charter. Typically, one would think, well, there's every 26 students that leave attendance area schools is a teacher saved. So we divide that. It's not necessarily true, but the starting point of the calculation is we divide the 100 by 26, which is the PTR, which is 3.8 teachers. But typically, we do not see that exact amount of savings because what we see is smaller. We don't see them leaving attendance area schools in perfect packages of 26. We'll have schools where 2 or 3 kids leave that school, and we're not able to realize a savings of a teacher. And so when you have 2 or 3 kids leave 10 different schools, you could see 20, 30 students leave and there was 0 teacher savings. And so typically we see about half to 60% of the teacher savings. So that 3.8 teachers that would be saved if they did come in 26 buckets of kids, 3.8, we multiply that by 0.6, which is a little over 2 FTE teachers. So we round that down to, we anticipate that we would save 2 teachers. And realistically speaking, in this, it's practical to just say they would come from Weller, likely. So 50, 60 students leave Weller, that's where we would see the savings, the two teacher savings. So 126,865 for each of those teacher savings creates a total of 253,730 in potential savings. Next slide. So the expenditure impact summary would be the $1.3 million allocation expense to the charter, a savings less the $253,000 for a total estimated cost to the district of $1,044,000. Next slide. Now jumping to the revenue side of the impact. So when a new school is established in our state foundation formula, there's additional revenue that comes with that. It's anticipated that a new school with 100 students would provide additional revenue of a little over $550,000, $552,780 based on my assumptions in the model. So typically, that would provide immediate additional revenue of that $552,780. However, we are currently in a hold harmless clause because of the closure of Two Rivers Elementary School. And so right now, in FY26, the district is receiving revenue for students as if Two Rivers Elementary still existed, 100%. So right now, there's no, and you can see it's a scale down effect. So in the first 2 years of a hold harmless, in 26 and 27, it's 100% hold harmless, and then it drops by a third the 3 subsequent years. And so right now, there would be no revenue benefit because we're already benefiting from the hold harmless. So if we turn around and comparing those two scenarios without the charter and with the charter, they're equal. And so if we jump to the next slide, we see a medium term, I wouldn't say a long term, but medium to long term financial impact to the district. So we see a total of the expenditure impact there in FY27. We'll look at the first year, the $1.3 million allocation, $253,000 in teacher savings, and no initial revenue impact because both scenarios would be the same. Both scenarios have Two Rivers, some form of school in existence. And so that first year impact would be the $1,044,000. And it's FY27, so this would be next school year. The school year after that, FY28, you would start to see a revenue benefit from an existing charter because the hold harmless starts to disappear. And so the FY28 revenue benefit of the charter would be $184,260 and a corresponding impact or cost to the district of $860,000. In 29, that would be 2/3 of the hold harmless would be phased out. So a revenue benefit of $368,520. And then in FY30, the full hold harmless is phased out. So there's zero hold harmless benefit left to the district. So there you're seeing the full $552,780 benefit of the charter in the foundation formula. And so the cost impact to the district levels out at a little under $500,000 a year. This is, last time we talked about this as well, where this is assuming a 6,660 BSA throughout these years through FY32. For context, if there was a $700 BSA increase the same as what occurred the last legislative session, that would be an additional approximately $130,000 in allocation to the charter or cost to the district. So 700 BSA equals about $130,000 in allocation to a charter with 100 students. Next slide. So some general observations here, and this was brought up a little bit earlier, just wanted to emphasize these points. In general, smaller schools have a harder time covering their fixed costs relative to larger schools. And so for a potential charter school in the Two Rivers area, the absolute minimum students would be 75. As at 74, there is a significant cliff effect there. I don't think I updated these slides. It's probably not in your hard copies, but on the screen, I added in revenue for 75 students is approximately $975,000. And then the loss of one student, you see that cliff effect. It's about $200,000 loss for one student. So that really is a drop dead point, really. And at 75 students, in my estimation, based on the application the charters put forward, it would be difficult to to realize the intent of their application with 75 students. So it's important, even at 100 students, it's somewhat challenging because they are a smaller school. The financials significantly improve as they go from 100 to 125 students. So it's about $13,000 additional revenue for each student for a charter of this size. Next slide, just kind of a review of the impact to our FY27 budget, just a preview. We currently have a range, a projected preliminary deficit of $0 to $5 million for the district. So it's important to note a couple of big things that we have on the horizon. That does not include any outcomes or impacts coming from union negotiations that we have coming up, nor does it include any impacts of new charter schools stood up in the district. And this assumes that deficit range assumes a BSA of 6,660. Next slide. So just a summary of the fiscal section of our presentation. So initial FY27 fiscal impact of a little over $1 million to the district. The financial viability of a charter in tours depends heavily on enrollment and getting enough students to be able to have an allocation that funds their mission. And then, I think it was mentioned earlier that the flexible staffing model that the charter did propose would not be in alignment with our FEA and ESSA negotiated agreements. The next section, transportation. So board policy 3540 dictates how we handle transportation for our charter schools. It provides a process for charters to be included in our transportation program on a space available basis using existing routes for attendance area schools. As of right now, we currently do not provide any transportation to our charter schools in the district. We have in the past based on circumstances, but we currently do not. The district is not required to establish routes specifically for charters, dedicated to charter schools. And then charter schools are not able to opt out of the board policy in order to receive state transportation funding from the state grant. And then this policy is in alignment with AS 14-09010. Next slide. So space available. So based on a space available basis, what that means is available seats on an existing bus, but it also means space within our routing schedule. So do we have enough buses and drivers for buses going out? Do we have enough buses to cover a geographic area? So not just space available on a specific bus, but also space available within our current routes to our attendance area schools. Students, the way it would look is students would typically ride attendance area buses to that attendance area school and then get on a shuttle that goes from the attendance area school to the charter school. Next slide. Typically in the past, when we have provided charter schools with service, sometimes there have been adjustments needed to their start or end times based on the start and end times of the adjacent attendance area schools. Sometimes there's been partial accommodations, maybe only morning or only afternoon service available based on the specifics. The possibility of transportation being available to the Two Rivers Homestead Charter would be based on route capacity. The most important thing would be student location. Basically, if there were no students geographically past the Two Rivers building, there would be no routes going past the Two Rivers building because the routes are going to serve attendance area students for Weller, for example. And so it would be very dependent on location of students that were going to Weller Elementary. Next slide. Again, there's a summary of the considerations. So transportation would be possibly provided based on, again, student location and as space were available. And the calendar, yeah. So certainly, if there's differences in the calendar, then buses would only be running on the main academic calendar that the school district goes off of. I'll turn it back over to Ms. Gillum.
Mr. DeGraw. For our last section of our presentation, we just wanted to go through a few other additional considerations regarding your consideration of this application. So first, nutrition services. It was mentioned during the presentation. Charter schools can provide the staff and appropriate storage and preparation spaces for providing meals. Participation in the school lunch program does require that staff is trained, but we can have the nutrition services duties provide by other staff if they are fully trained to provide that. So there is that option of providing a cold pack lunch that requires only cold storage and no heating equipment. There was also a question regarding Title I consideration. So we wanted to review our process for how we do identify Title I schools. So administration tracks free and reduced lunch rate percentages throughout the school year, and they help us predict which schools may qualify for Title I funding for the following school year. So we track during this school year in order to identify for next school year which schools will receive Title I funding. We track those numbers through August through March. And then we take the average between October and January to identify which schools would qualify. As a district, we set a cutoff percentage, so we say it must be 40% or higher. If a Title I school does fall below this percentage, we can request a waiver that may be submitted for the following year that has to be approved by deed that would allow them to remain a Title I school for the following year, even though their percentage fell below that 40% threshold. And our goal is to fund between 7 to 8 schools to make sure each school can get enough money to run a strong Title I program. We do also choose which grade levels we prioritize. So as a district, we've focused on elementary schools and middle schools as far as our focus for what schools we would prioritize for selection as Title I schools. We did want to note, though, that if any school's economically disadvantaged rate goes over 75%, the district must provide it Title I funding regardless of where we set the line. So that would apply to all schools, including charter schools. In the last 3 years that Two Rivers was open and operating, their average rate for economically disadvantaged students was 49%, just for a reference point. We also wanted to talk about the impact to other schools. As Mr. DeGraw noted during his presentation, we do anticipate that Weller, if Two Rivers were to be approved and open, we would anticipate that Weller Elementary would have the most significant impact, with potentially losing about 50 students, reducing their capacity utilization from 69% down to 60%. We could also anticipate that the Best Homeschool program would lose perhaps 20 students due to the overlapping enrollment interest. And then the remaining students we project would come from a variety of other elementary schools across the district without that significant enrollment impact. As Mr. DeGraw mentioned, that they would come in such small groups that it probably would not impact the staffing levels or enrollment significantly at those schools. Again, for new board members, we just wanted to note that we have opened a number of schools of choice throughout our time as a district, and at least through the most recent 20 years as we look back. We have a note regarding when different charter schools or schools of choice have been opened throughout our district. And just, we do feel like we do have a lot of options for families, and we're still seeing the same decline in enrollment over the course of time. And then also just wanted to note recent charter impact on enrollment. So our 2 most recent charter schools that opened were Boreal Sun and then Discovery Peak, that when they opened at those specific points in time, and how that impacted our enrollment. The next section is about investment in the school district, and I will turn it over to Ms. LaPlante to speak about that.
All right, thank you very much. It is again my pleasure to explore the possibilities of what making an investment in our schools could look like. We know that an investment in our district is an investment in our students. But just like you would make careful considerations, oh, thank you. Just like you would make careful considerations when investing your own dollars for your own purposes, we would want to carefully look at and consider the investment of making the dollars on behalf of the district. We would want to consider how much money is being spent, how much does the idea cost, how many students are benefiting and being positively impacted by those dollars. How innovative is the idea? Is it replicating something we already do, or is it bringing something that new and innovative to our students? So that's how we would analyze the positive impact for our students for an investment. But we also want to make sure that we are looking at it through a lens of flexibility. And this is really important because, as you know, the revenue sources for our district are somewhat known, but also somewhat unknown. So each year we have to be able to adjust to the funding sources of the state, and we have to be able to either cut or maybe sometimes we're able to add back, but certain things are able to be more flexible than others. Pupil-teacher ratio has some limitations, but it is relatively flexible. That is something that is pretty easy to adjust by one student, you can make an investment on behalf of the students, or you can cut to save money. It definitely impacts students, but that's something that's relatively flexible. Adding to programs or purchasing materials, those are things that are flexible. They would have minimal impact to the students, certainly minimal negative impact if we don't have to do them, and certainly positive impact if we do have the opportunity to do them. Obviously, closing whole buildings and reopening whole buildings is not a very flexible thing to do. That's a big thing to do. It's a big thing to undo, and it's not very flexible. So looking at what the options are on the table at this time, you kind of have the Two Rivers Homestead Charter that's being proposed. There is also an option to potentially reopen Two Rivers Elementary School at a reduced model similar to what we have done out at Salcha. That would be with about 6 staff members, 3 teaching staff and 3 support staff. We would estimate about 65 students returning to the school at a cost of about $500,000. So if we do either of these and we utilize the building either for the Two Rivers Homestead Charter or for the Two Rivers Reduced Model School, we would no longer have the satellite office for BEST there because there wouldn't be the same need for that community to sustain BEST. Alternatively, we can look at a different type of investment where we can take some of the ideas that have been proposed and I think very positively welcomed by the board and do many of them at Weller. Weller is already exploring being a focus school. They have a lot of place-based ideas. They use nature. They have trails. There's a lot of things that was a natural crossover. And I'm sure that as families enrolled in Weller, we would be very happy to support them growing some of these very same ideas at Weller at very minimal to no cost to the district, in which case you would still have a potential investment opportunity to add back Stream 2, that's science, technology, reading, engineering, art, math, and music. We have begun exploring these ideas with our music teachers, with our teaching and learning staff, with our principals, and there's a lot of excitement around this. I can talk about that in another minute. But if we do these two and the building at Two Rivers remained unused as a school building, it would still be available to be a BEST chart or BEST satellite. So we would still be able to support people in the community who wanted to still have access to the BEST satellite and of course still have access to Weller Elementary School as well. Just for folks that maybe hadn't heard it before, there is an idea being explored along with schools individually throughout our district looking at being focus schools and what they would like to do. We are considering what it would look like to invest in STREAM coaches. STREAM coaches would focus on ELP type lessons. They would utilize kits that we actually already have, our art kits, our science kits, technology. They would go out to schools and model those lessons in the classrooms for the benefit of the students and the teachers. And we would also be looking at bringing back instrumental music to the elementary schools. I was very excited when I met with the music teachers a couple weeks ago, and we began exploring these ideas. One thing that I feel very strongly about is I would love for this to happen without it being a pullout model, without it coming at the cost of classroom core instruction. And I think that they actually leaned into that idea and are considering ways that they could do that. So kind of in closing, we are looking at our strategic plan. We are trying to make some decisions about where to invest the district's resources. I would suggest that if you encumber the costs of the charter school now, that makes it less flexible for you to look at how to spend your money when you get into the budget season. That's then a upfront cost that you've already committed to. These other things you wouldn't have to necessarily commit to now. There'd be lots of opportunity to explore. And as you were able to, as you got into the budget season, you could make some choices then about what you were able to afford or not afford. Some of these things can be scaled up or down with a relatively ease. So I don't know if this is the time to make additional investments to add back band, orchestra, ELP, sports, or activities, but I do know that now is the time to be creative, to use innovation to solve our problems and to try new solutions. It's literally in our strategic plan. And so we are a creative group of people. We are resourceful. And I think that keeping our schools, helping all our schools be creative to attract students and retain students is a benefit to our entire community and our district.
Dr. Meinert, that concludes our presentation. I return it back to you and President Burgess.
Thank you, Ms. Gillum, Mr. DeGraw, and Ms. LaPlante. I'll now bring it to the board for questions, comments, discussion. Ms. Maple.
Do you want me to just start with one? What's your
Thank
plan?
you, Ms. Maple. Yeah, let's try to let's say we'll allow 2 questions at a time, 2 follow-ups per question for now. If we end up getting pressed for time, we might scale that back. And let's, as I requested last time, to the extent possible, let's try to keep topics focused to a particular subject at a time. I know that's not entirely possible all the time, but I think it helps the community if we try to focus like that on one section of the application or one subject. Does that help, Ms. Maple?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. The floor is yours.
I was going to start at the beginning of the presentation, but I think I'll start with okay, doesn't matter. Okay. To clarify, Mr. DeGraw, we do expect that we would maintain hold harmless funding if a charter opened in that building.
So if a charter opened in the building, we anticipate the hold harmless would end, but then a new school would pop up in our funding model and provide that additional revenue that was referenced in the presentation.
Okay, so that's considered
5.
in the projections that are in. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And so from that, on page 51, am I understanding it correctly that the net cost to the district would be cut in half by FY30?
Correct.
And then following that line of thought, do you think that the reduced model talked about on page 70, which starts with the cost of $500,000, not starts, it is a cost of $500,000. Well, I'll say what I think, and then please tell me if I'm right. I would imagine that the reduced model over time would be more likely to increase in its net cost, as opposed to the charter model that looks like it would decrease over that time, because leaning on what we're seeing at SALCHA, that there's conversations about reinvesting, that if there were the reduced model, is it reasonable to assume that over time it wouldn't stay at that 500,000 if we were able to invest.
That's a reasonable assumption.
Okay. I think that's my fair share for the moment.
Thank you, Ms. Maple. Next, I have Ms. Hewitt on Zoom.
Hi, sorry I'm not able to make it. Are the 72 people on the intent list, you said there was a mention of them being, 20 of them being enrolled in BEST currently. Do we know if outside of those 20, are there more that are identified as enrolled in other schools?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Hewitt. Unfortunately, I cannot provide much detail on that. The 72 students that are on the intent to enroll form was referenced by the charter school during their presentation. So we are making an assumption that there would be significant crossover between the current 21 students enrolled with BEST in the Two Rivers area and the students on that intent to enroll. And I also then cannot speak to where those students would be coming from regarding their current enrollment.
Thank you.
Any follow-up, Ms. Hewitt?
No, I think that's all for right now.
Okay. Ms. Maple.
While you were presenting that, their intent spreadsheet was shared with the board with more of that information, with detailing whether or not students were in the district or out of area. So we do now have a little more of that information available.
Thank you, Ms. Maple.
Point of order or process. If board members are getting information that's public testimony, I would suggest that that be sent to Ms. Richardson and sent out to the board outside of this right now, because we don't all have access to that.
Thank you, Mr. Doran. It did come through Ms. Richardson to the board, but I agreed we don't have time to review that information at the moment. Thank you for your point of order or process. Next on my list, I have Ms. Carol Hubbard.
Sorry, let me get back to where I was. I was looking for the information. I wanted to touch on a couple things, even in the line of what Ms. Maple was referring to. On page 51, well, let me go to page 48. On page 48, we have the variable adjustment of 2.3 teachers. And I'm that's going to be a stickler for dollars here. 2.3 times 126,000 is not 253,000. It's more. So we're missing numbers here, which then when we pull them down, causes the net impact to be lower, which then when we're looking at a lower number over time on page 51, we're looking at more of an annual cost by the fourth year, where it drops down to like 491, we're looking at about 450, closer to 450 than closer to 500,000. And so then as we're looking at cost per student, like when we look at the cost of what you said, that roughly BEST was $248,000 is what we're paying for utilities and what have you out there. And so that's roughly $12,500 per student, which is very close to what the charter is is asking for. So the cost per student is practically the same. It might be a little more investment on the top end, but it kind of averages, it drops down and averages out. And I just want to point that out, because I think that's, as we're looking at what are we investing in with our students, the investment is roughly the same. And I think it's important to note, because the model that we have here, like the lower cost model of matching SALCHA, is actually more than the 453 if we're bumping the numbers correctly. I mean, and I don't know that I'm doing it right either. I'm just saying that 2.3 times 126 is a different number than what's there. It's almost 291. And so, I mean, 40,000 is not major, but when we're looking at these and we're trying to compare this program to that program, and is this equitable, or is this, are we investing more over here and less over here? It's all about the same. And so it seems like these programs are pretty equal between BEST and SALCHA and Two Rivers Charter. They're all pretty close to, those models are all very, very close in dollars. So I don't know that the dollar investment is necessarily.
Ms. Carol Hubbard, could we give administration a chance to reply?
Sure.
Mr. DeGraw.
So Ms. Carol Hubbard, specifically to the chart on page 48, the numbers there are 2.0 teachers. So we don't, elementary is different than secondary. We only deal in whole FTEs. And so the 2.3 is rounded down to 2.0. So that's the specific 253,730. It's 2 times 126,865. So those, we anticipate that to be 2 teacher savings, not 3. And so the 2.3 was rounded down specifically to that point.
Ms. Carol Hubbard, if you'd like to continue. Okay, thank you. Ms. Julian. And after Ms. Julian, I have Ms. Hull.
Thank you so much. I'd like to talk a little bit about, I have a scenario that I want some clarification on. On page 51. So we have the cost right now, just to clarify, the net total cost to the district projected at 100 students of opening up a charter school in Two Rivers with 100 students, with the school size and all the multipliers. The total net cost is just over $1 million estimated. We have been presented tonight with a fiscal year 27 possibility of a reduced model, which is similar to what we have in SALCHA, which is a total net cost of 500. My question is, does that 500,000 assume the savings of about 200,000 from folding BEST?
So are you asking, is it?
I'm asking if we have another savings, if we're, yes, it would be, I would want to know what the net is at that space, because if we are opening up a reduced model at 500,000, I think that we would, I think it's appropriate to look at, to consider the holistically that there is a savings from folding BEST.
So based on a number of different factors that could go 100 different ways, in concept, it would be $500,000 cost, but that would be a net of an additional 250 compared to what we're doing now out at the building.
Yeah.
Is that what you're getting at?
That's what I'm getting at.
But I just want to stress, and this happened with SALCHA, when we're talking about something here, the net final product of what we see of a reduced element there's 100 different factors that could go 100 different ways. But I think what you're asking is it 500 in addition to what we're already doing? No, it would be an additional roughly 250 beyond the 250 that we're already doing.
I have a-
Follow up, Ms. Julian?
I do. Thank you. Okay, so now we're cooking. If we do that, do we then, I'm looking at the hold harmless distribution on page 51 and how it, how we shift things. If you open up a reduced model, are you in fiscal year 28, are we going to see, and I'm not going to ask you for specifics right now, Mr. DeGraw, on numbers, but I think it's important to look at a scenario where a reduced model is opened up in fiscal year 27, but then what does that do to hold harmless and long-term potential revenue increases if the scenario is that a charter opens up not next year, but in fiscal year 28. And because there's a significant cost savings that we're seeing every year. So is it the opening of the school building that triggers that? Or is it opening of a school, and would we start this over if we opened a charter school?
Dr. Minor?
I'm going to hop in, and then if Andy wants to respond or could respond to that, I'll let him do it. I think it's important that we focus on the charter application itself. We put some possibilities for the board out on the table just as ideas for investment. If the board is interested in those additional ideas, I think that's a separate work session to really dive in to those particular ideas and flesh out what that could look like and what the board's interest in that would be. But at this time, I think it's really important for the numbers specifically that we're focusing on the charter application.
Ms. Hull?
Thank you. I'd like to also take the time to just acknowledge that Representative Mike Praxis joined us this evening. And I believe that this was a question that was asked to Dr. Ott while he was here. But again, I just want to reiterate the question of, do we know how many correspondent students that are out of our district that live in that area?
I don't think we currently have that information, but it's information that we're gathering.
Follow up, Ms. Hull?
What would it take to get that information?
We continue to work with the state to try to get that information, and it sounds like we're actually closer than what we've ever been before. As we discussed in last week's regular board meeting, this is something that districts had asked for decades, essentially, to have the disaggregated information per zip code. Last year, we were able to get it based on community, but not down to the zip code level. And some conversations that Dr. Ott has had with some folks at the state, it does seem like it might be a possibility this year. And so once we get that information, specifically to your question, we'd be able to share that with the board.
Mr. Doran?
Thank you. So as long as we're there, I'll focus more around 51, slide 51. Two questions relative to it. When we talk about target enrollment, expected enrollment, there are numbers all over the board, from 75 to 150, more likely 75 to 125. The extra 25 to 150, if I understand that, is really for part-time field school that we don't really have information on at this point. So for ease, we went to 100 because that's what this charter school would like to at least start with. But if I understand, the real target is to get to 125, or we would be authorizing them to go 125. So that's actually the allocation that we need to be factoring in. Am I correct on that?
You'd be correct if that's the actual number that that are the number of students that enroll. And so that's what the charter allocation would be based on from the district, is the number of students that enroll.
And follow up to that. And then my understanding then, that is the what we would be authorizing within this application. We are authorizing them to have 125.
I mean, I think that's the big question, and I can have Ms. Gillum speak to that, is that it's not clear what the board is currently authorizing because of the multiple different numbers that are within the charter application. But I'll have Ms. Gillum maybe provide some additional information around that.
Dr. Minor, and thank you, Mr. Doran. I would say that it is not clear at all in the application of what the number you would be authorizing would be. There are different targets slated throughout the application, both, as I said, ranging from 75 through 150. The notation regarding 150 being that hybrid enrollment was specific to the presentation. It doesn't actually make that distinction, to my understanding, in the application. And I do just want to acknowledge what Mr. DeGraw said, that 75 really is a minimum, that there's language regarding charter school funding, that below that 75 mark, it would really be, the fixed cost would be too much for the charter. So I just do want to acknowledge that again, that I would say it's unclear.
Okay. So my point then, my question I would leave to the administration to come back with, Charles, is really we should anticipate it could be 125, and that could be the cost. There's uncertainty as to really what, but there would be that. They had enough students come to them and said, oh, we want to keep accepting beyond the 100, they could go to 125. So we should at least factor that in, but the uncertainty is a problem with the application itself. Second question on that page is the teacher savings. If you can better explain to me how that is. I don't think it pencils out because we are still paying those ostensibly, as we've said many times, teachers follow the students. Those teaching positions are just moving to a different building. They are coming out of that dollar amount. They're being paid either way by the district. It's not really a savings, and more likely we would wind up with more costs because of the fact that students don't come in the packages that they do. And it's more likely that we might have plus of 24 instead of 26. However, we would be coming closer to the state target, which we have to work towards and really should start budgeting towards that. So I fail to see that there's a teacher savings in this calculation. If anything, it'd be an additional cost because for the most part, there are fewer, small enough students coming out of different groups, even if we take the larger group from Weller, that when you go across all their classes and grade levels, so I have a real concern with that as to how realistic that figure is.
Mr. DeGraw.
So in this scenario, Mr. Doran, we have PTR calculators that we plug in at the grade level, at the specific grade level. We plug in assumptions if 50 to 60 students were to come from Weller Elementary. In every scenario that I plugged in, it reduced them by 2 teachers. So that's, and offline, I can share with you those tools that we utilize. But if if 50 to 60 students leave any elementary school, generally speaking, there's going to be a 2-teacher drop in what's required for the school. So that's all I can say.
Could I do a follow-up with that?
Go ahead, Mr. Dorn.
I agree, 50 students, you're probably going to look at 2 teachers by our numbers, the easy calculation. Depends how they distribute. Those 2 teachers, our 50 is going to this charter, is the assumption. Those 2 teachers basically just go over there. I mean, I'm just not saying the positions, not the teachers. They have to go through the hiring process, et cetera. But that cost is already done. It's not a savings. It's not an additional cost. They just move. And so I fail to see why we're coming up with a savings amount because it's still coming out of the pot, whether that's which school they're aligned to in the big pot, they're the same. So I do think it's a bit of a misnomer.
Dr. Minert?
So I can follow your train of thought there. I mean, I think what's important to understand, if you stand up a charter, there's definitely going to be an investment by the district. I think what we're getting at with those potential savings, and for an example, let's say instead of a charter, it had 6 teachers at that charter school. If 2 are moving over, then they only need to hire 4 additional charter or teachers rather than the 6. And so that's why there's a savings there potentially to the district, because those 2 teachers are already accounted for, like you're talking about, within the district, but it's not 2 additional to the district on top of the 6 that school may have needed. And so that's why we're factoring that in a bit to show that there is a slightly less impact to the district because of those teachers possibly being able to be shifted over to that school.
Last follow-up on it. And I don't want to get too heavy into you have to convince me.
Sure.
I appreciate the feedback because it helps me work it through. I absolutely agree. We're not adding 2 additional teachers, but we're not saving 2 teacher positions either. So you can talk to me on the sides.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Doran.
I have Miss Carol Hubbard and then Miss Julian.
Okay, I just wanted to ask a question about least restrictive environment, but I know Ms. Hall is not here, so maybe this is not a good time for that. But the statement was, how will they handle, or the statement was that they didn't express how they would handle a student whose least restrict environment is not Two Rivers. And I just like somebody to explain exactly what that means, please.
Ms. Gillum?
Thank you, President Burgess. So through the IEP process, through when a student is having their individualized education plan developed, their least restrictive environment is determined through that process. That's part of and I will not say this as eloquently or as expertly as Ms. Hall would, but we would determine what their least restrictive environment. So some of our students, their least restrictive environment is in a specific district-wide program. So last year when the board was considering school closures and we looked at where those district-wide programs are placed, that would be considered a district-wide program. So students whose least restrictive environment is identified as one of those district-wide programs, the school district makes a placement for this is the district-wide program that you would be placed at. However, we don't preclude those families from applying to schools of choice. We say this is your least restrictive environment, but they are free to apply to schools of choice. And so we're looking for, in an application, a consistent way of how those types of applications will be dealt with. So in terms of it might say, some charters say that a student whose least restrictive environment is not identified as being watershed, or I think it's in watersheds that I pulled the language from, has to be placed in that environment, or any charter school it could be.
Thank you.
Ms. Julian?
Thank you. I'm looking a little bit into the lease in particular. Okay, so this is something that we have gone through already this year, but I'm now excited that we're looking at it for this application. When I look at the assumptions from us on the lease, so there's $100,000 that's allocated. So it's kind of a split between the lease and the budget. But we have assumed that there's about $100,000 in there to pay for a lease. Now that assumes a split service model, right? But I think that we're going towards that if we were to stand up a charter or even a reduced model, but let's focus on the charter application, that we would, in a sense, fold the best program out there. When you talked about the dollars of the utilities costs for what we're paying right now, I wrote down about $50,000 in utilities. Okay. And then there's also a custodian in there, a full-time custodian that we pay for. This isn't the one that they put in their application, but this is what we're paying for right now, which is $72,000. So, and then there's also the $127,000 for the education specialist, but I'm going to just X that one out. So if we're looking at a facility cost of a custodian, one custodian, and the utilities, it's about $122,000. Okay. When I'm looking, I'm just trying to capture a charter school that operates in a borough building lease, so for comparison's sakes, I'm looking at Effie. And when I look at Effie, they're paying, and with fiscal year 25 in the approved budget, I'm looking at in here a rentals fee, which is $257,000. Okay. Does that include rental costs, utilities, and custodians?
It includes utilities, not custodians.
I don't see anywhere in the FE budget for any custodians.
For the district, I'm not sure what you're looking at, Ms. Doolan.
Yeah, you wouldn't for the district because they're providing that custodial services through their charter.
Okay. So I'd have to go into there. Okay. Got it. Okay. So it's 257. And how many students does it serve, FE?
About 140.
140. Okay. That's helpful to know. So to accurately look at a lease with Two Rivers, we would, let's say I'm spitballing here, but a figure of about 100 might be, and this is me spitballing during a work session, not officially stating any numbers, but what does the process look like in negotiating a lease? And of course, this assumes that we would fold best.
Yeah, so typically sky's the limit on a negotiation of a lease with the charter. Really, there are no, and we're kind of in uncharted territory here. We don't have a lot of experience. We have some experience with the FE Cochran, with the Howard Luke building, but yeah, they're really, the district or, the owning entity wants to cover its costs and make sure that there aren't additional costs beyond the allocation we're providing to the charter. And that includes long-term capital and major maintenance needs as well. So it simply can't be just, we need to cover, near-term minor maintenance and utilities and snow removal and things like that. There has to be a long-term perspective in maintaining, possible larger needs. So.
Follow up, Ms. Doolan?
Are we allowed 2 questions or just two
Go ahead.
questions? Can I ask another question? Okay. A different question. Title I. I'm going to assume that if Two Rivers was a Title I school with 49% of their student population previously on Title I, that they probably stood up as a charter school, would qualify for title funds. Now, I also understand that as a district, we only get a certain amount of Title I's set by the federal government, and then we distribute that set to the schools. So because we have another school that qualifies doesn't mean that we all of a sudden get more money. So we have a pot of money that is distributed to schools. I also understand that having a charter school receive it, charter schools don't have all the programs that meet every single student's need, like our SPED programs, like our gifted and talented programs, and that's by way of how they're structured. However, I'm concerned about a student population that presented at almost 50% qualifying for free and reduced lunch. If those students choose to attend a charter school, I would hope that as a district we could allocate some level of title funding so that the students that rely on those, that need those additional services could have those, even if it is a different formula that we'd apply at a charter, not the full necessarily one, because of course not all students are able to participate in all the programs. But what does that funding look like for a title? Because I think that that significantly impacts the projected budget, not only on the revenue side, but also on the expenditure side, because then there, of course, could be some planning for like nutrition services, maybe to offer hot meals versus just the cold packs.
Dr. Minor.
Yeah, so unfortunately, Miss Gray isn't here this evening. She had a family emergency and she could speak to this in great detail. But I think it's important to understand that if they did stand up as a charter for next school year, they wouldn't immediately necessarily qualify for that title funding for next school year, because there'll be a procedure that the district goes through and we'll make that determination in terms of what that allocation will look like. Noted that you and I think other school board members may be interested in seeing support at that school. Without having the numbers in front of us, no idea whether or not that they would qualify based on whatever the student enrollment is. Some of our title schools, the different staffing models that they enjoy over non-title schools, some have an assistant principal, some have literacy coaches, some have tutors. So there's a number of different staff members within the school to provide specific supports to our title students above and beyond other schools. And so really we would focus that support on providing students with student interventions that help students coming from challenging socioeconomic status to ensure that they're achieving on par with other students in other schools. And so, if we go down that road, we would certainly share with the board how those allocations were made and what that might look like at the specific school. There's also conversations with school leadership teams and principals at the school in terms of what supports that might look like for the specific school.
Okay, I have Ms. Maple, then Mr. Doran, and then Mrs. Hull.
Thank you. My first one this round, I think this came up in our last charter presentation about the lottery, that is the only category or group from both of the applications we've looked at that have a precedent from other charters in the district. The children of founding members, that one does have precedent.
Thank you, Ms. Maple, for the question. There are a few different areas where we would have precedent. So children of founding members does have precedent. Staff children is certainly in our collective bargaining agreements. Students is something that we have had precedence with, or siblings, not students. Siblings is something that we have precedence with. There are also a couple charter schools that do have a limited enrollment for a neighborhood. So they do have a neighborhood preference area within their lottery. Number two, the students who completed the intent to enroll form is certainly not something that we have any other precedence with, and also goes against the state statute language regarding a random drawing if there were more students applied than there was space for.
So follow up, if their lottery were limited to children of the founding members and siblings, teachers, these things that we have, and the district ran the lottery, then that would be in good legal standing. Theoretically. Like that's removing the problematic pieces.
I guess I would say the first problematic piece is that there is no mechanism for a lottery at all, that it is truly a first come, first serve admission preference the way that it's written right now. So I guess I would need to, theoretically speaking, I would need more details regarding how it was actually going to resemble a random drawing if there were more students than space for.
Got it. Okay. And then my second question, building off what Miss Carol Hubbard asked about with the least restrictive environment, I know that we have heard about issues at other charter schools where, struggling to serve their SPED populations. And I think you started to touch on it maybe regarding watershed when you were answering Miss Carol Hubbard's question. But is there a model to look to yet for this, or are we sort of in like a reactionary period and trying to make sense of how to best serve SPED students in these alternative learning settings?
I can take that. There are other models. So some school districts don't pass on any of the charter funding. Like they work with individual charter schools in terms of the funding, and they don't pass on the withheld funds. And so the school district will then maintain all of the funding essentially at the district-wide level, and then provide whatever special education services are needed at that individual school. We haven't gone to that model because we're not prepared to necessarily do that, but some other schools and school districts do that, so that the charter itself isn't necessarily responsible for those special education services, but they're kind of paying the district for those services.
Follow up to that, do any of our charter schools in our district have any of it, specifically in the presentation was talking about how to process those applicants that they couldn't provide the least restrictive environment for. Have any of our other charter schools tackled that yet?
No, I'll let Ms. Beam talk to that.
So we've really just started going into this, which is why Ms. Hall created the document that we added to the contract this past year. And as she has made herself available starting this past year for those new incoming students who have an IEP, so she can look at it, and they work with the parents and the school to come up with a plan on, if this is the least restrictive environment, this is what we do. If it's not, this is the path that we need to follow. So really, we just started opening that issue so we can do what's best for our students.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Dorn.
Actually, that just gave me a segue to make an observation in preparation for my question, that recognizing that the landscape for charter schools has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. Mindful of when this district pioneered the very first charter school and the conversations then, but then the last 5 years in particular, as more and more charter schools around the state doing different things, have raised questions, have asked for clarifications of some of the legal questions that are out there still being determined. As you mentioned, dealing with problems that, or issues, concerns, benefiting students, how we do that, we have to be completely involving. And so not only are we involved in a evolving landscape, but those applying are doing that. So my two questions, I want to come back to Ms. Dillion's topics. Title I, and I know, again, this is probably an evolving issue, but having my own experience with Title I schools, and sometimes when it goes away and when it comes back on a moment's notice, we don't get warnings, that there are priorities within it. So it's not a strictly how many schools, and I would need a currency. We need, Ms. Gray to come back to us with that, but a currency. The feds at one point used to say you start with your highest need school, fund their needs, and then you just keep going as far as you can go. Other times we've been able to stretch it and get down. You could be over 40% and still not be a Title I school. That has happened. I know it for a fact. But there are other considerations in Title I, and they're, I think, also confirming that they are strictly supplemental. They're not the basic operational of school, so it doesn't give the school more money in their operation, but they get more money to provide additional services. With that in mind, a charter would not necessarily, also when you look at what the implications are for a charter school, a Title I school serves all their students, unless they're targeted, which is a little different story. But most of ours are full Title I. They serve all the students in there, which may be a lot of students who are on the cusp or just to fill out the form. How does that play in our considerations for size of school, the total number, even if percentage may be lower, but the number of students is much higher than another school? Are you able to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the percentage is important, and so more so necessarily than the full number of students, because because there's less students, you wouldn't need as many supports either. And so definitely the percentage is important in that. I think what you're also hitting on at the beginning of your discussion is that title funds are not guaranteed, and in today's world, they're really not guaranteed. There's been all different kinds of cuts floated out there, potentially at the federal level, in terms of what title programs will look like in the future for school districts. And so I think it's important not to base decisions right now on what might come in title funding next year, because as of right now, we don't have a good idea if there's going to be cuts, and it's not a good practice to build programs or schools based on unknown grant funding, because as Mr. Doran said, grant funding cannot supplant your general operations. It's there to supplement what's already happening in the school.
And follow up to that, and I would assume that ostensibly, when you start down the percentages, you might be dropping a school in order to add a school, which can happen in the norms.
Yes, especially in today's environment. I think you're exactly right.
Okay. My second question, I want to go to the lease. And to me, this is one of the things that's, when we focus on this application, that's a gap. We don't have any lease. There is no lease even proposed.
That's correct.
And so, and related to that is if we were to do a lease, consider a lease, I come up with closer to $150,000 for it if I look at slide 33. Plus, because we've got the maintenance, we've got the utilities, which will continue to go up. We've got have to figure out something in terms of custodial, whether it's their hiring or is included. But we also have to factor in the 6-year capital improvement, because I would assume any lease we would want, and the leasee would want to be a minimum of 10 years. Because the charter would be 10 years. And you don't want to run out of a building, not have a building 6 years in. So we would have to be factoring those, which is $15 million, and, you know, not all in 1 year type of thing, but that has to be factored into the lease cost to some extent, even if it's just a match. That has to come up with a local match. So that has to be factored in. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay. And related to that lease is that right now, to see the building is not available because we are using that building. Ostensibly, Best Satellite can use it fully. I assume they use it somewhat extensively, not only for classroom space, but the library access, the gym access to other pieces. Similarly to families coming into the Nordell Center, they come in and they're using multiple areas. So how much would we actually expect that best model, that model of drawing families in, providing places, which is a growing model within correspondence programs in the state, ergo, having buildings as we put in place a few years ago. My concern is, I believe you kind of implied it, that it would be one or the other. You know, we couldn't have the best and we couldn't necessarily have, but we don't know how much space would be available to lease out. And that, you know, so knowing there is no lease in here, what are the considerations that have to go into determining if there would even be a lease? And that conversation has not happened.
That's correct. I'll elaborate a little bit on that. So yeah, that's correct. I mean, as stated in the presentation, in the current application, the designation of the room that they potentially put forward as a shared use agreement wouldn't necessarily work for best use cases. Also, as an administration, as we've been discussing, we don't think that having best there, if a charter school was also there, would be the best use of district resources. We're pretty confident that many of the students enrolled in BEST would most likely enroll within the charter school, and so the need for a BEST teacher within that building would probably be diminished. I think it's important when you're talking about then, if that were the case, the school board and the administration would need to decide if that building is available for lease. If we make that determination, there is a first right of refusal from existing charter schools for that space. I think it's unlikely that they would use that space, but that is a part of the process. And then if we went down that road, then we would start the lease discussions. But there's definitely, some stepping stones that we would need to work through to even get to the point where we would build a lease. And the first one would be a decision whether or not that building was available and that we wanted to have that conversation of a tenant. As we've discussed in the past, it might also be a decision of the board or the administration that keeping or holding on to that building is not in the best interest of the district. And so returning that to the borough could be on the table as well, and something that the board would need to discuss based on what's in the best interest of the district.
Follow up, Mr. Doran.
Okay, so with BEST and looking forward, we made the investment to put a satellite there, also out in North Pole, partially because of the demand and interest of people in those areas to homeschool, but not necessarily want to, or being feasible to come into town for services or anything. So this is our first year. My assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, is that when we set that up last year, made that investment in our budget, and I will say it's not my assumption that I anticipated it would grow. But with that investment, that growth to also attract correspondence students that may be in another program, but now find, oh, there's one in their neighborhood or closer nearby, because the other ones are primarily in town also, that might be attractive. So are we expecting a growth from having those satellites there, besides simply serving those who were already there?
I mean, that would certainly be our hope, is that that provides a competitive advantage to provide great services and supports to our students, not only in Two Rivers, but in those surrounding areas that might not currently be with BEST. And so this year certainly would serve as a baseline, and we would hope to see growth in the future of students that aren't currently enrolled within our district or enrolled with BEST currently.
Thank you. Put me back in.
Mrs. Hull.
Thank you. So correct me if I get the verbiage wrong, but Two Rivers was a Purple Star or had a Purple Star school distinction, right? Okay. So my question is, are those students, well, I have a couple questions. So the first one is, what are the benefits from having that distinction?
So having that distinction is recognizing schools that provide excellent support to their military connected students, whether that be students that are just entering the school, students leaving the school, the unique challenges that our military connected students face. And so BEST is also a Purple Star school, as is many of our other schools. I can't remember what number we're currently at, but Fairbanks does have the most Purple Star schools within our district. And so that's something that we're very proud of. But each individual school takes on its own flavor and plan for becoming a Purple Star school, and then writes an application based on what kind of supports they're going to provide specifically to their military connected students.
Follow up.
Follow up.
Does Weller have a Purple Star school distinction?
I'm not sure off the top. Ms. Gillum says yes, they do.
Okay, and can I ask a simple second question?
Go ahead, Mrs. Hull.
Thank you. Just for the record, is Weller a Title I school?
Weller is not currently a Title I school.
Okay, I have Miss Hewitt on Zoom, and then we'll go to Miss Doolean and Miss Carol Hubbard. Back to Mr. Doran.
On the topic of the waivers for FEA and ESSA, do we have any waivers for alternative scheduling right now?
Yes, we do. Effie Cochran runs an alternative calendar, and I believe both Chinook and Discovery Peak run an alternative schedule on Fridays as well.
And have we heard anything about a waiver yet? Is there any new developments there?
This is Miss Hewitt, this is Sarah. You maybe can see me speaking, so I shouldn't be worried about that. But yes, we do not have any updated information regarding specific waivers to the collective bargaining agreements yet.
That's all. Thanks.
Okay, Ms. Julian.
Okay, thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the options that you've put in front of us that we could explore otherwise, and I just want to express where my thoughts are there. I took the drive. I've driven now out to Two Rivers. I actually went this weekend, and I drove all the way out there to the school. Went out past where some folks live as well, and then I did that drive down to Badger Gate to see what that drive looks like in the wintertime when it was snowing, low light. It's a heck of a drive. And I really hope that we can figure out how. It's a heck of a drive, and it's a community that doesn't have a lot of additional resources. When you look at 49% of former students who were there were on free and reduced lunch, it's not easy to ask for help. I'm pretty darn sure that number would be higher if more people were to apply and take advantage of the migrant ed application too. So when you go out and you look at these communities that are in our outside of kind of more of the city centers, even if you look at the district, the congressional district data around it, it might show that the average household income is higher than, let's say, central downtown Fairbanks, but that's distributed over a much larger geographic area. So my concern is around the location and the number of students who are out there that need additional support, and the number of families that the drive time and the fuel cost is prohibitive. So trying to figure out a solution for students out there, and I'm glad that we did best, that we gave something in that, and I'm proud that we were able to invest there. So I would be more open to figuring out a solution that's location-based versus something at Weller, only because that location piece is very different than the other school communities that experienced a closure. Very different. And I'm speaking from one that experienced that personally. So if I can express my desire to look at something that serves those students out there, I'm expressing that desire to administration and publicly right now. However, we also need to make sure that it's fair and it's cost effective and it's legally sound. And I know that there's issues with the application as they stand right now that need to get addressed. Material changes. So my question really is around looking for additional revenue or exploring additional revenue that could, in a sense, supplant, not necessarily supplement, like a title funding could. But this field school that was discussed early on, there was kind of questions around revenue. Could there be a revenue generator there? Also, pulling in out of district homeschooling. Now, this is all anecdotal because we don't have the data from the state, but I'm hoping that we can get that data on the state on zip code. But when you go out in those communities, you know that there is a higher level of homeschooling out there because of the time that they would have to get their kids up to get them out to the schools as someplace else. So, what are there any other schools in Alaska that use this field school and dual enrollment? And if so, what's the revenue from that? I don't know.
Dr. Meinert.
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure if any of my administrative team members are shaking their heads no. We're not sure of other schools that have a similar model. Again, the revenue, Mr. DeGraw presented that pretty clearly to the board in terms of what revenue we could count on. There's always all different types of grants that you could potentially go after. I will say the grants world is very precarious today, and that you wouldn't base, it wouldn't be my recommendation to base a decision on the possibility of grants in the future.
Follow up, Ms. Julian?
Yeah, if I can follow up, I completely agree. What you need to do in building any type of responsible budget is figure out guaranteed funding in a sense. And so, but that is interesting if there was an ability to actually build out a revenue model for this field school, which actively engages out of district homeschool families in a dual enrollment scheme that then could potentially help them reach that 100 student target, because enrollment is also incredibly precarious. And I am very nervous about, if I can have a point of clarification, that it's 74 students is when that fiscal cliff happens. Yeah, and so, I mean, this is, and knowing that their last enrollment was 64. And of course, some of those students have aged out. Some maybe have aged in because of kindergarten, but we know that the kindergarten class is much lower because of birth rates from 2019. So, but neither here nor there. Getting to 100 is going to be a stretch. My follow-up question, Mr. President Burgess, is what does it look like to develop a relationship with the military where there's some sort of endorsement and some sort of partnership with that Badger Gate to get some sort of buy-in from the military that this is what they're looking for? We know that that's where military connected families, that's where we see enrollment possibilities. And we also know that there's a lot of military families that are in out of district or even out of state homeschools. So that was a very curious thing that came up for me, and I'm wondering what that might look like if they were to expand that.
I'm not sure what that looks like, but I do want to say that we have an incredible partnership with both of our military bases, that they regularly encourage their service members to enroll within Fairbanks schools. And so we'll continue to, work on that partnership. And if the board made the decision to stand up an additional school, then we would make sure that they're aware of that school, and if there's specific either supports that those students need or marketing or whatever it may be on their side, we could have those conversations with those military branches at that point in time.
All right. So just noting for the board, it is 7:49 p.m. We've been at this for a while now, and just wanted to remind everyone to please try and be as concise as possible in your questions and answers. Let's and we'll because by request of the administration, let's take a short recess. We'll do 5 minutes. We'll be back here at 7:45, please. Or sorry, 7:55, please. We're not going to time travel. All right, we're going to call this school board work session back to order. It is 7:58 p.m. All right, and next in my queue was Miss Carol Hubbard.
Thank you. So what I would like to ask is a question of Mr. Beam about curriculum. I just would like to understand, I think that when we had our work session last week, there was some conversation about curriculum and textbooks and standards and materials. And I think there's a misunderstanding in general, and it seems to be fairly rampant because you and I just had a conversation and it started out, we were good, and then all of a sudden we were way off from what each other believes. So what I'd like to ask is that could you explain curriculum and exactly what we are looking for when we're asking them to provide the curriculum?
Dr. Minor?
Actually, I'd like Ms. Gillum to talk about what we're looking for curriculum specifically, and then we could go over to Mr. Beam if we need some follow-up.
Thank you. So in terms of what we're looking for in the application requirement for a charter school, we're looking for what is the written instructional program that addresses state content standards, so what's provided to districts from the state, that then also aligns with the content on the statewide student assessment system. So we're looking for what is that written instructional program. It might be aligned to those state content standards. And then is also aligning to what the assessment standards are. So when we speak about curriculum, you know, as a district, we have our curriculum that is approved by the school board that demonstrates how our grade level alignment, the content that is to be covered is aligned with state standards. I did note that during the work session, we did separate that from curricular materials. So the application is going to require the curriculum regarding an instructional program. And we might also delineate that from, you know, as a teacher, we have our curriculum. From that curriculum that identifies, you know, we might refer to the pacing of when we're going to cover the standards throughout the course of the school year. It looks at vertical alignment and building upon those standards from grade level to grade level. From that curriculum, I might then work on what we call a unit plan or a lesson plan, what I might cover over the course of a unit and a lesson plan. And you understand this, you're a teacher. So then that's different than from, say, what is also adopted by the board regarding those approved curricular materials. What are the instructional materials that we're going to provide to students and teachers to access that curriculum?
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from administration? No. Okay. Follow up, Ms. Carol Hubbard? No. Okay. Mr. Dorn?
One of my questions will be on curriculum. So I understand in this application, it is not here. If the applicant had decided to follow the FNS.
Mr. Dorn, can you move your mic closer, please?
Sure. If the applicant had decided to use the FNSBSD district curriculum, they could reference that and put that in. There's no cost to that curriculum. Just wanted, because we had some question about that last week, and I wanted to confirm that my comments were accurate. Okay. And we do have schools that use our district curriculum, although they may ask for a waiver on certain subjects, and then they provide their written curriculum, not materials, curriculum as you described it. Okay. So if I might just, with that clarification, and my understanding, just putting out there that there's no lease, there's no curriculum, we have an incomplete application.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, which will lead to a question at the very end when we have an incomplete application versus an application. My other question is in terms of the fiscal and local contribution. So mentioned on slide 46, but also calculated on the additional sample charter school estimated funding attachment. So my question is, how do we, well, one, distribution of local contribution to charter schools. My understanding, it was optional. Am I correct, or is it required? And how do we determine it? And the basis of my question is that it's baked into their budget to have a certain amount from, if I read the numbers correctly, we factor at a 50% for the amount above, but why we don't get local contribution is not given to any individual student. It's not based on that. It's not based on any individual school. I know in the budget process, we have, depending on how well off we seem to have been over years, we have given more or less. So how are we getting, why are we determining 50% at this point of an optional that is actually money to the district as a whole to support the district as a whole? So
Is the question, how did we come to the 50% of the discretionary amount? Is that, how did we land on that?
right, and if I am correct that it is optional, and then I would question in terms of rating that amongst all students. So because we don't get it as per student as we have the BSA,
Correct.
this is over and above. We make a request over and above. We need this to operate the district.
Yeah, correct. It is at the district's discretion because it's not a per student allocation, the local contribution. The district made the decision to, I found documentation that at some point back prior to 2010, we gave 0% of the discretionary amount, the amount beyond the required minimum. So I anticipate we went to 50% of the amount beyond the minimum somewhere between 12 and 15 years ago. And I am not privy and have not found any information as to the why that it was settled on 50%. So I can't speak to why, just that, yeah, it is at the district's discretion how it treats amounts of the local contribution that we allocate to charters.
Minor.
So we baked in that kind of historical perspective into the numbers this evening, but certainly the board can adjust that as they see fit going forward. And now that there's more awareness within the board and the community in terms of the flexibility in using those funds, I mean, I could see that being a part of future budget discussions and reallocating some of those funds to either other schools, students, or programs.
Okay, follow up. And just in recent years, that has been a point of discussion.
Mhm.
And budgets, the budget, because of the shortages in public education funding, that has been heavily discussed, and I think the percentage has been different in actuality. So, okay, thanks for answering the question.
Okay, I have Ms. Maple, then Ms. Hull, and Ms. Julian.
So I know at the beginning of the school year, our neighborhood schools, sometimes we shift teachers around. Does enrollment at, are teachers from charter schools ever shifted in that same way if enrollment turns out different than was anticipated? If they hired a certain number and hoped for 100 students to be enrolled, hired for that, 75 were enrolled, would teachers be moved around like they are from neighborhood schools, or does it operate differently because it's a charter?
It operates differently because it's a charter. So
Stuck with.
that's correct. And we're also not able to transfer teachers into charters without, permission from the teachers and talking through that. So it's a different process, definitely, for charter schools.
Okay, thank you. And my next one is, there was a question from Mr. Doran about, how the building's being utilized and if it would really look that different with a reduced model. And from my understanding, the building at this time is not being fully utilized like Nordale is, like the resources available at Nordale aren't what's the right word?
There aren't other departments currently located at Two Rivers like there are at Nordale.
Correct. And the use of different resources within the building, that the whole building is not able to be utilized, but with a reduced model. So the utilization of the building would look significantly different between the best hub and a reduced model, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I have two more, but you put me back in.
Ms. Hull.
Thank you. So I know that we're not talking much about this tonight, but I would love to just briefly discuss next steps so that way if we decided we wanted to, we could know the process. If we did want to stand up Two Rivers as a neighborhood school again for $500,000, what would that process look like?
Okay. So there's not a defined process for standing up a new school. I think it'd be through conversations with the board chair and myself. If there's multiple board members interested in exploring that option, then that's something that we could potentially put on future work sessions. And if that progresses as an idea that the board wants to continue to explore, the board could certainly make that decision prior to budget season or wrap that into a budgetary decision as you're working through the budget, starting in February.
Follow up?
Follow up, Ms. Hull.
If we waited until budget season, we talked about it then, what does the timeline look like for opening a new neighborhood school?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on the model that we're looking at. I believe, if a decision was made within the budget season, we could certainly open next school year as long as everything falls into place like we would hope it would be. If we were talking about a significantly different model than what we currently operate in our traditional schools, I couldn't guarantee that the Homestead model would be fully cranking on day one, but it's something that components of it could potentially be there, and then we would build as the school year gets going in terms of what different activities and different components of that Homestead model would be there, and what the board would want to invest in to have that model kind of take its life within that school.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meinert. Ms. Stoulian.
Thank you. I'm really looking at this, the fiscal year 25, we last spring, we got a data dump fiscal year. I'm building context onto my question, President Burgess, so I will try to be as concise as possible while also providing context.
Go ahead, Ms. Stoulian.
Okay, thank you. So fiscal year 25, we got that data dump for 1 year. We have in fiscal year 25, from those students who are enrolled in public schools in the Fairbanks North Star Borough, which is the size of New Jersey, 11,800 students were enrolled in our district and also our homeschool program, BEST, our district schools. 3,494 students who are public school students who live in the Fairbanks North Star Borough, the size of New Jersey, were enrolled of out-of-district homeschools. That is a total of 15,294. And we, in the borough, that's 23% of school-aged, of public school students who live in the Fairbanks North Star Borough were in out-of-district correspondence. That is the largest, we, in a sense, in the Fairbanks North Star Borough, compared with Mat-Su, Anchorage, Kenai, and Juneau, we by far have the largest percentage there. We've seen this happening with the standing up of out-of-district correspondence school buildings in our borough. We've seen this happen. There has been absolutely a targeting for the students. Now, they know where we live, but we don't know where they live because we don't have that data. We are flying blind. We are trying to figure out where to meet students where they are in a borough the size of New Jersey with blindfolds on, trying to make sure that we are the best fiduciary stewards of the money that is given to us. So this reduced model, I'm sorry, not reduced model, this year-round schedule that mirrors the military personnel and family schedules is, and also a subsistence type of schedule, albeit if the fish run later, they might have to adjust that late July start time. But that's a really innovative model. And I think that it's one of the most innovative things that I've seen when you look at different schools and what they're doing. That I think, and again, because we have these blindfolds on, but flexibility is a like huge reason as to why when we lost people during COVID to homeschool programs. Flexibility and money, and not necessarily the testing requirements there. Actually, they're not there, but really have made those types of programs attractive. But a year-round model that provides flexibility is, I think, a really exciting thing that we could innovate to pull students back. What are the district's thoughts around a year-round calendar? I mean, is there a world where we could move to that type of model? Let's say we charter it, and if we're treating it like a true charter, we charter this idea and it works. Could we expand that to other schools? I mean, I'm just so curious about that model. Thank you.
Dr. Minor.
So definitely, Mr. Doran did.
I'm just conscious, President Burgess, and in process, point of order, you had mentioned we should concentrate on the application as before. I think these are really, really good questions and they need to be addressed and going ahead, but I'm trying to figure where these ideas that we should put into future conversation, but specifically relating it to the application tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Doran. And yes, we are at 8:17 p.m., so it is getting a little bit late, and I do want to keep this focused. Ms. Julian, I'll allow you to follow up.
I'll just add to the question. In the context of the application that's in front of us that presents a year-round schedule and does not have the waivers, because my understanding is that the waivers would have to, there's quite a few waivers that would have to come from ESSA and FEA, or maybe just FEA. Do they have the power, ESSA and FEA, to say, nope, we're not going to give a waiver, and then we're just like, okay, well, we can't approve this? And what does that process look like? And also, what are your thoughts around like feedback that you've had as a district around a year-round model in regards to the application that's in front of us?
All right. Great question. One that I would love to explore, and definitely love to explore with the community if that's something that the board wanted us to go down that route. I think it would not be right to assume that this year-round model would work for every family and that every family would be excited about it. So, as part of our strategic plan, there's a component in there that talks about exploring alternative schedules and alternative models for school. And so we could certainly do that. If this is, the model that specific charter has chosen, that works best for their specific community, then that's great. They've hopefully done that legwork that the people that they're targeting and the people that they're looking at for enrollment support this model. Now, from an educational standpoint, there is some data around supporting a year-round model, especially with at-risk kids, because you don't see the summer slump as much as a traditional model. But there are a number of considerations that we would have to work through that are rather complex at the district level in terms of policies that currently guide our school year calendar and waivers with our labor unions who are partners in education. And so, yes, we would need to work through those specific things if that's something that we wanted to explore, within the charter itself, but certainly on a broader level.
All right, I have Miss Maple, and then there's no one else in the queue. So, okay, thank you, Mr. Doran after after Miss Maple.
My second to last question is directly related to what you were just saying. So I understand that, no, sorry. I understand that it's expected that the charter application clearly details which waivers they need or are working on getting. And that if there was a waiver that they were seeking that was denied by FEA or ESSA, that would significantly hamper the process. But is a charter expected to have all of those waivers approved and completed before we could accept it? And I ask because I know that in the past, it's been these years-long processes that might have lent itself to that, as opposed to this new 60-day timeline. We receive it, yeah.
So yes, those waivers do need to be in place, and I'm glad you brought up the timelines in terms of working with charters. I think the big difference in the past is that they have been year-long or multiple year-longs processes, and so as letters of intent were put into the school district, the administration and the school board worked for a long time to ensure that all of these things were ironed out in applications or as much as possible prior to them coming to the board. And so that's why this evening you see a lot of concerns that the administration has for this particular application. It doesn't mean that administration isn't supportive of the idea or doesn't like some of the innovative concepts that are within the application, because we certainly do. I think there's a ton of exciting components within it. It just would be irresponsible for me as the superintendent to recommend the board adopts or accepts this charter application with the gaps that we're seeing within it currently, the way it stands.
Okay, thank you. And my last one is, I just wanted to confirm from page 20, the early dismissal times messed up the student contact days, but I wanted to confirm it's not an issue with having early dismissal every Friday. It's just an issue of the time selected, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm all done asking questions.
Mr. Dorn.
Okay, I particularly like the second to the last question that Ms. Maple asked, because I think that's an important piece, and also compounded by the fact that the legislature passed a 60-day piece in the statute without really thinking about or ostensibly without thinking about what the implications and ramifications of that is. So a couple of things, and to confirm, the calendar is okay, except that it does need some details ironed out because it's short, 4 days, and it exceeds in the professional development area. So, okay. The lack of a draft contract, not the charter, the draft contract, I call it the administrative logistical 5-year that currently we do for 5 years with charter schools. There's a district template, which is neither included, and just a procedural question. If the application was complete, that is considered a draft, and before it would go, if we approved the charter, that draft then would go into final form because we can't approve it as a board either um, until it's finalized. But before that would go to the state, who gives actual final approval or denial of a charter.
That's correct.
Okay, but that is absent from this application.
That's correct.
Okay. Do you want to keep going? Hitting them fairly quickly.
Please proceed. There's no one else in my queue at the moment, so
Okay.
fire away.
On the after school, slide 16, the after school activities or whatever, that becomes an issue primarily because it is part of their model and plan of service, whereas if they were not offering schools offer after school activities that we don't have to approve or such. But the issue here is it's really an extension, I would put under their curriculum, kind of their field school is under the curriculum. It's an extension, it's separate, but there's no real, but that's why it becomes an issue. Is that or a concern? Am I correct?
Ms. Gillen?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Doran. So, Mr. Doran, yes, I would say it is an issue for us due to the lack of detail regarding it, because in the initial application, again, it was referred to as after-school care that they were providing until 5 p.m. The change of language to clubs does make that different, but we still just wanted to note that there aren't details regarding the staffing requirements and then also the costs, because they did state in the application that it would come at a cost to families.
Regarding staffing, we get the reference that their PTR would be greater than the state target, but we know it's only a target from the state. It is not required, and they only need to say that you're working towards it. So I just want to see how get a better understanding how problematic that aspect is. I know it is higher than most of the other charters, but we're not really doing that comparison, but this is a reference point. So how problematic is the state target? It's not required. It's just.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Doran. Specifically in this situation, I would acknowledge that because there are no class size targets specifically, it's just, again, it's more of a target acknowledging mixed age or mixed grade level classes. And it is just one above, I believe the state target is 23 for grades K through 5. So it is only one above what those, what that target is for those grade levels, and acknowledges as well that it is not a hard target per grade level as well.
Okay. Thank you. The transportation area really is not an issue. Am I correct on that? Because there is no transportation.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Right. On the slide 64 impacts, we talked about Weller, Best Hub. Do we know anything in terms of potential impacts to Tixic Brown or Arctic Light, which have also been mentioned as potential drawer areas by the applicant?
Not at this time, we don't.
Okay. Okay. All right. Then my question, as I mentioned, as I go through this application, it has gaps that concern me. But as we've been going through and I've been thinking about it, the gaps are also reflective of an incomplete application. So my question is, what is our standing responsibility as a board, whether we say yes or no, whether we approve or deny this application based on the information or lack thereof in this application versus saying it's incomplete. And a lot of situations, if you present something incomplete, if I apply for a job and it's incomplete, I don't even get considered. So and what's the ramification of that, both for continuing the conversation or for, depending upon what we decide, if we take action, how that plays out to the state? Because it goes forward to, one, it definitely go, if we approve, it definitely goes forward to the state, but we have an incomplete that would need to be completed before the state could ostensibly look at it fully. So we have that problem. If we deny it, if the parties decided they wanted to appeal, but they have an incomplete application, we have not really, if we've denied it, but it's incomplete, that incomplete goes to the state, or can they finally, I'm seeing problems and I'm trying to figure out where this is.
I'm not sure your exact question, but what I will say is if the board denies it, it doesn't automatically then go to the state. The charter APC would need to appeal to the state if they felt like that was in their best interest to do so. So does that get at what you're asking?
Well, okay, right, I know it doesn't automatically go. They would have to actively appeal. Is that taking a application with its gaps or its incompleteness versus, filling in the gaps? I assume it would need to come back to us because they're appealing what we decide on. And I'm trying to see the onus of making a decision versus saying it's incomplete. We don't have, and we're not really saying yes or no. And maybe I'm looking at too fine a line, but these are situations we are relatively new to the charter school landscape.
For sure. I think it's a good question. And if the board's interested in me working with our legal counsel to provide the board a recommendation on that, we could certainly do so. What I do know is that you could bring the submitted application forward and act on it. But what I don't know necessarily is if the board has the authority not to act based on an incomplete application.
That's my question. Thank you. You clarified that.
Ms. Julian, did I see a hand?
You betcha. Okay, so thank you to Mr. Doran. My understanding, maybe I don't mean to clarify what Mr. Doran was asking, but I had a similar assumption that this process is that the prescribed process is that we have received something, whether it's incomplete or not. This is what we are voting on. It was submitted, and this is what we're voting on. And then but we're in a dance with anyone who applies for a charter school and there's no one necessarily controlling this. It's because everybody has a little bit of control in this, but it is up to them, the APC, what they do next, and what is the time frame if they choose to reapply or change things about the application and reapply. What does that process look like? Is there a state statute that outlines that process?
No, there's not currently state statute that outlines that process. So, if there was a denial, then, the APC could continue to work with district administration and the board towards a more complete application, they would have to resubmit a letter of intent and then, of course, an application. And, what we would encourage is, and which we'll continue to do with other potential charters that come forward, is if there is an intent submitted, don't then submit your application directly after that. If you want to truly collaborate with the district, and not saying that Two Rivers didn't, because they've been great to work with, but if a group wants to work with administration on collaborating and us advising on where there are some gaps, that certainly takes a lot of time, because administration is not only focused on just a charter application, we're focused on running the district day-to-day tasks. And so that takes a considerable amount of time to work through. I think it's also important to recognize that it's not administration's job to ensure that a completed application comes forward to the board. It is solely the responsibility of the APC to do that. District administration can assist and review, but it is not our responsibility to necessarily do that. So want, the board and future charter groups to be aware of that as well.
Ms. Julian.
I have another question. And I really appreciate the administration putting forward the fiscal outlook for the next 6 years. That is contingent on hitting 100. And one of the concerns that I have about the application is also the target number of students, and also looking realistically at what they've had in the past. I don't know if it's appropriate or not to ask for a follow-up, but are the numbers scaled similarly if enrollment is closer to 75, if you just kind of take 25% out every year? Would that be fair? But knowing that you're just one away from that fiscal cliff from enrollment size?
Yeah, so I think the number at 75 was 975, and then the number at 125 is 1.62 million range. So yeah, you're about $300,000 for each 25 students. And it's not exactly linear, but it's ballpark.
Mr. Dorn.
To the fiscal outlook, slide 53. I know it's just been a few weeks that in terms of looking at the district potential for a deficit, I note that it does not reflect any forecast of having money to invest. I have a hard time to think in terms of zero, that we are actually absolutely in balance, especially given the bullet points, what is not included in that projection. And I know it's too early to tell. We don't know some of those, but I'm concerned about realistically, what is that? I would say we're probably closer to 5 unless we have something that I'm not aware of, or more, and potentially, practically speaking, probably more. Assuming what we are, that BSA will stay the same, hopefully that the borough contribution will stay the same. We will have lost inflationary benefits on that, and we have costs that still need to be factored in. So could you give a little better cloudy crystal ball on what we're really realistically looking at for additional cuts?
I'll make an initial statement and then I'll hand it over to Mr. DeGraw. I think the big one that you pointed out there is bullet point number 1. It does not include the impacts of upcoming union negotiations. That could be a big number depending on, where everything lands. We know that there will likely be some increases, and even small increases on a percentage basis are millions of dollars to the district, and budgets that they have to figure out what the trade-offs would be for that. And so I think you're right. When you factor that in, it certainly won't be a $0 deficit. It'll likely be more, but I'll hand it over to Mr. DeGraw. If you took that away, kind of where we would be looking at right now.
Yeah, so we're still in the preliminary stages of putting the budget together and the deficit. We don't have all the information that we need to, so that's why there's a range there. I'm very confident that the final preliminary deficit will be somewhere in that range, but yeah, certainly not counting any impacts of negotiations or potential charters. So that those two items would significantly increase any preliminary deficit that we'd be looking at.
Okay, and that is a follow-up. That's a major assumption that where the borough gave us an additional beyond what they had planned, that we would still get that additional and
Yes, that's baked into the cake of that range. Yes. Something similar to what we received current year. Yes.
okay. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it has also crossed my mind that we may not get as much money in the appropriation from the legislature. Are we factoring that in? The governor did cut the legislature's appropriation and they took an override. He has given indication that next year he might, I mean, it's his own words, so might do a similar thing, but hold things up. So he's got plenty of time, what he has indicated.
And yes, to that point, that does, the 0 to 5 million does make the assumption that we do actually receive 6,660 in BSA.
Okay. And even if the BSA stays the same, the appropriation for that.
Yes, if we receive revenue equivalent to 6,660
Okay.
BSA.
Thank you.
Ms. Maple?
Thank you. I just wanted to, I know we're not digging into the other options that were presented, it's more informational, but I wanted to express my very sincere gratitude to the administration for putting those concepts together for us to be able to evaluate this charter while also considering what other things exist, whether it be long-term, interim, just really trying to get an idea of the whole landscape. And I really appreciate it. I know it was on very short notice also. And I want to just express interest as we move forward that it's a conversation that I do hope to continue having, even though I haven't asked any questions digging into those alternatives this evening. And that's it.
All right, we have once again reached the end of the queue. So let me just double check since Ms. Hewitt is on Zoom. Ms. Hewitt, did you have anything further tonight?
I don't.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members? Ms. Julian.
Yeah, I just want to say for the record, I am concerned about the way that the lottery is recommended in the application, and I would hope that there would be I hope that there would be more of a desire to follow state statute on that open lottery should it exceed the recommendations. I think that the statute is clear, and that to me is a clear concern of mine. And then the volunteer hours, I was hoping that the administration could talk a little bit more about that. Volunteer hours are another way that charter schools can get into trouble by leaning on volunteers for operations, whereas that should never be the case. And in regards to this application in particular, what were some of those concerns around volunteer hours that maybe, if there are any, that extend beyond the requirements that were stated and maybe go into a budgetary or a supplementing? Mm-hmm.
Do you have any of those?
Yeah, I guess the concern is, and this is one of those pieces that may read differently in different charter applications. The concern regarding the current litigation in Matsu is about a requirement. So certainly, that is something, encouraging volunteer hours is something that exists, I would say, in all of our charter schools and all of our neighborhood schools as well. We encourage volunteer hours. When it becomes a requirement for enrollment or for participation, that is when the question of the legality comes into it, if that's a requirement. The other one, on page 116, there's also the concept of donating money to equate to 1 hour of volunteering. That would also be a new concept that does not exist in other charter schools, so that would be a legal question that we would have as well.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gillum. Mr. Dorn.
Just procedurally between now and next week. So if the applicant provides information regarding following up questions that we asked last week, or this, does that become part of this application, or is it outside the application? I'm trying to say, I mean, some of the gaps, if they fill the gaps within a week, which would be very challenging because some of the gaps are because there has not been a full vetting of, you know, conversations with unions, conversations what waivers are actually needed, what the curriculum would be, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just trying to understand information that we receive over the next week.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So if additional information is provided to the board can certainly have conversations about that, but it doesn't add to the application that is before us. And so it doesn't substantially change the application that you will be making a decision upon next week. If they wanted to fill in those gaps, what would need to be done is withdrawing the application, filling in the gaps, and then resubmitting a completed application at that point in time.
Follow up. Okay.
Follow up.
So that's very helpful, but that information might help inform conversation. We've talked about different groups have taken extended periods of time to work through, but that might form a basis in terms of further conversations outside of this application.
For sure, and that's why we would rely heavily on that letter of intent period and not filing your application until the APC is fairly confident that their application is complete or near complete.
Thank you.
Okay, you're going to ask one more time, anything else from the board? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, board, for the great questions. Thank you, administration, for all the work you did to put together this presentation and all of the tough questions to answer on the fly here as well. I really appreciate all of your work. And with that, I'm going to give it back to Dr. Meinert for a closing statement.
All right, sorry, President Burgess. Just I did want to thank the Two Rivers APC and the work that they put into their application. Regardless of the decision on the charter itself, I think you put forward a lot of innovative ideas that people are excited about. And so regardless, I think you're going to move education forward in Fairbanks. So we appreciate that. Also appreciate just the professionalism that you've shown to district administration and to the board throughout this process. I think it's been a collaborative process and one which I know administration and the board has appreciated. And so just wanted to extend the thanks to the APC and the community for putting it together.
Thank you, Dr. Meinert. And with that, we are adjourned.